Hi, sweetheart. It's Amber. It's not Wednesday. Today's Thursday. Sorry, I was running a day late because Stefan and I celebrated our 1 year anniversary on Sunday. So we were doing our celebratory stuff yesterday because he had to work on Sunday. So that's why I'm a day late. Our topic this week is intersecting identities. And I feel like before I really get into the stuff that I want to talk about, it's probably important to tell you a little bit about how Stefan and I both identify and or are. I guess some of them are not identifications, they just kind of are. So I have a very long list of things. So I identify as black. My ethnicity is Irish, African, Native American, and French, or at least those are the pieces that I know of. Cisgendered female. I definitely identify as a Midwesterner, specifically as a Hoosier. I have a master's degree. I'm able-bodied, middle class. I'm the oldest of two, and I generally identify as queer, and I grew up as Catholic. And my family, both of my parents, for most of my life, have had white-collar jobs. So I definitely identify with sort of a white-collar kind of family. For Stefan, he is white. His ethnicity on his dad's side is mostly German, almost exclusively German, I think. On his mom's side, Polish Jews who actually came to the U.S. through Argentina. So definitely Polish and Jewish, but have sort of a South American, his mom definitely has sort of a South American mindset at times too. He identifies as a transgender male, Midwesterner as well, but definitely identifies really strongly with being from Ohio and being from Cincinnati. He has a bachelor's degree, and he's in school to be a licensed massage therapist, which is more of a trade school. He's also able-bodied. In terms of white collar or blue collar, his family's kind of mixed. His dad had a blue collar job for all of his life, working in a factory. His mom has kind of a mix. She's had some blue collar jobs working in factories sort of things, and then also some more white collar jobs in offices and that sort of stuff. He grew up not religious at all, but is nominally Jewish, and he is the youngest of three. His oldest brother is a half brother. I think for me, the two biggest intersections around our relationship, and it's not necessarily the trans piece of the relationship, it's just kind of our relationship in general, is race and gender. The race piece for me is really interesting. It was funny because I saw a thing a couple days ago, or maybe it was earlier today, on BuzzFeed, and it was about being the only black person in your class. If I can find a link, I'll post it below. And it's definitely a lot of the experience that I had. I identify as being black because I am, and a lot of the ways in which I see the world are related to many of my identities being in the minority, being black, being female, being queer. That those kind of three main identities are minority things. But it's interesting being married to someone who is not black. And I don't know that I think about it most times. And where we live in Ohio, most people don't really care. There's a lot of mixed couples, and so it's not really anything that people seem to be concerned about, at least from my experience with it. But it's funny because I've had two people recently, both older people, almost old enough to be my parent, ask me if my husband was black as well. So it was back in end of August maybe, and I joined a choir recently. One of the members of the choir, we were kind of talking, and I said something about, oh, well, my husband and I, and she said, oh, well, was your husband that guy who was here the other day? Because the previous week in rehearsal, there was some random black dude sitting in rehearsal. I don't know who he was. I still don't know who he was. But she made the assumption, because I said that I was married, and she didn't know who the guy was who was sitting in rehearsal, that clearly he must be my husband. And then I had a similar sort of experience a few days ago with someone I was speaking with, and I said something about my husband, and she said, oh, and she I've known her for a few years, and she said, oh, is your husband black? And I'm like, no, he's very white. German and Polish, so very white. And she's like, oh, okay, well, that's okay. Like, that's cool, that's great. And it's interesting to me because I always struggle when people assume that because I'm black, I must be with a black person. In the same way that if I was any other race, that people would assume that I'm with people of my same race. I think you know, it's sort of this underlying microaggression style racism that people just make that assumption. And I try to not let it bother me because at the end of the day, I love him and I'm glad that we are together. But it's interesting to me that people would just make that assumption without saying anything. I'm not surprised by the assumption, but I still find it really off-putting and pretty frustrating, especially the woman that I sing with in choir. You don't know me from Adam. We had been in rehearsal for all of 2 weeks, and it's like, you don't even know me, so why don't you ask me about my husband? Or about, where's your husband from? Or, that sort of stuff. Or tell me a little bit about him. And in me telling about him, you would find out that his mother's side is Polish Jews, because that's something that is a big part of his identity. So it's something that I talk about when I'm telling people about him. So she would have found out that he was white. So it was something that just really rubbed me the wrong way. The other piece, and I think I've talked about this in videos before, it's probably been a few weeks now, maybe months now. The gender piece for me is always really interesting. I don't know that I recognized before being with a trans person how easy my life was around gender, or has been around gender. I never questioned my gender. I never wanted to be a boy. I never considered that. I always identified as a girl and was okay with that, and recognized that there were things that society thought that I should or should not do because I was a girl. But I think because it's just me and my sister, there were things that we did that some of my friends who have brothers never did. Like, we mowed the grass, we took out the trash, our chores were not along gender lines because there weren't brothers to give chores to. So it's just been really interesting to me, recognizing the ways in which I have privilege being a cisgendered person, and that's just, and recognizing the ways that I don't have to work as hard, or I don't have to worry as much when I'm out because people see me as female, identify as female. So in that respect, life is pretty easy for me. The other intersection that I think plays out in our relationship is where we live right now. Dayton's kind of an interesting city, and I've described it to people in that Dayton can be very East Coast in how it perceives people or how people are dealt with. A lot of people in this area, from my experience, are kind of, you do your thing, I'm going to do my thing. As long as your thing doesn't interfere with my thing, then I don't really care what you do. Dayton's progressive in some ways and still a small town that has some red tendencies in a lot of other ways. But I think what we've seen in terms of location is that most times around here, people are they see Stefan as male and he doesn't really get a whole lot of pushback or flack or people who would necessarily notice now. When we were first dating, before he transitioned, there were definitely people who would stare at us because boobs and short hair is confusing for people. So there were people who would stare because they were trying to figure out this boobs and short hair thing. But now that he started to transition, now that he wears a binder every day, we've really found that most people around here, if they know, they don't say anything. And if they don't know, they just see us as a straight couple, and that's kind of it. Hope everybody's having a great week. If you're watching this and you work for the government, I'm sorry. I hope you're back at work, and I hope our representatives can figure their shit out soon. And we'll see everybody next week.